Welcome to the Wingman Show. My name is Drew Brown, and my wingman, my man, the number one guy I know, Dr. Paul Thompson. What's up, brother? Welcome to the Wingman Show, where we're floating like butterflies and stinging like bees. Rumble, you two badass jet pilots, rumble. Welcome to the Wingman Show. My name is Commander Drew Brown. My wingman, my friend, the guy who watches my six is Dr. Paul Thompson. What's up, brother Paul?
Well, Commander Drew, it's good to see you once again. Looks like you're still at sea. If they kicked you out of the country, what's going on?
We still have not made it to Barcelona yet. And we're going to Casablanca first. I'm going to see Humphrey Bogart. How about that?
That's good. Make sure you have a tuxedo.
I will, but you realize Casablanca doesn't look like it does in the movies. I've heard that. So I won't be disappointed, but don't expect everything in the movies to look like reality. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. For the first time I was in Los Angeles, I wanted to go all the famous sites. And I went to the famous sites, but on those long boulevards, you could go from the lap of luxury to some pretty dangerous places that I never saw in the movies or on TV.
You didn't. You never saw King Kong on the Empire State Building either, did you, Paul?
No, he was gone when I showed up.
All right, well, let's start this puppy off with a quote. Everyone can rise above their circumstances and achieve success if they are dedicated to and passionate about what they do. And that's by Nelson Mandela. One more time. Everyone can rise above their circumstances and achieve success if they are dedicated to and passionate about what they do. Nelson Mandela, what do you think about that, Paul?
Yeah, dedication and passion will get you through the tough times. I just finished a project I've been working on for 18 months. And at the very end, ran into some problems that were like easily solvable, but I couldn't see it and I had to step away from it. And my wife saw my frustration with it. And I came back to it, had a clear thought, instead of giving up. I solved it in about 90 seconds. Something in front of me. So you just don't give up when it gets bad. Step away for a second, take a breath, look at it with fresh eyes.
That's an excellent suggestion to tell people when they're really working on a project and they don't think they can go any further. Take a step back, take a deep breath, and try it again. All right, Dr. Paul, we're still in Who in the Hell are the Wingmen anyway? And this is part 4, I believe. And we leave the U.S. Navy to go work in an airline. So why don't you start off telling me, Paul, how was that transition and how did you get your job and who else did you apply to?
Well, the transition was pretty smooth. Emotionally, it was different. Going from the Navy into civilian aviation. I didn't know much about working for an airline. I'd applied to maybe 3 or 4. The first one was US Air. They didn't respond back for about a year and a half, by 18, 19 months. In the interim, this company called Federal Express offered me an interview. I said, okay. I knew one guy that was working for them who just started there recently. He said, it's great. I said, okay, I'll try it. So we showed up there, went through the interview, and, essentially got out and started working for them. The transition was different. My biggest transition was going from a military world to a civilian world, and particularly a civilian world in that part of the country. It was very different. It was very, very different. Uh, it took me a while to acclimate to everything. I also applied. Let's see, who else I get selected with. You asked me, Southwest, American, TWA at the time. I think there was Braniff, and I think that in US Air, like I said. And US Air responded like really, really quick. Had the interview, it seemed to go well, but I didn't hear anything for it was about 18 months. in that time. But in that time period, I'd gotten on with FedEx. At that time, it was called Federal Express. That term FedEx came from ramp workers who were loading the airplanes. Instead of federal and syllables, they would just call it Fed. Sometimes FedEx, but Fed. I heard that all the time. That eventually led to the big name change of FedEx. What was your transition from the U.S. Navy to civilian aviation? Who did you apply for, and who did you apply to?
Well, I always wanted to be a Delta pilot. I thought that they were the coolest airline. And so, coming from the Navy, I had all my qualifications. I also applied to American, United, all the big airlines. And I applied to FedEx, which I really didn't know much about. But when I got to Delta, I got an interview. I flew to Atlanta. I had a great interview, and I went back home knowing I had a job. Well, they didn't hire me. And it wasn't until years later I found out why. And actually, the number one person who made that decision was a psychologist. And I think you've heard about him, but he used to have a rocking chair and he would rock in his chair and ask you questions. Well, what I found out is in that Southern model of this white captain, his parents weren't divorced and my parents were. And that's what stopped me from working at Delta. A little side note that that crazy psychologist who didn't give me a job, believe it or not, I'm sorry to say, killed himself in the office. I really was disappointed that I was not flying for Delta. But this company called Federal Express told me to come in for an interview. I later found out that they have the most black pilots of any airline. And I didn't know that then. I was just going for an interview. Seemed like a great company, seemed like great people. Well, I interviewed, and believe it or not, I got the job. And in the interview, I had to fly a simulator. I had never been inside of a commercial airplane before. I've never been inside one of those little civilian airplanes before. The only thing I ever flew were T-28s, T-2s, A-4s, and A-6s, all Navy airplanes. So when I got into this simulator, it had four engines. I think it was a DC-8 simulator. But anyway, it had four engines, and I really had no clue of what I was doing. But the reason they hired me is because when they told me to go to 10,000 feet, I did not accept 10,100 or 10,050 feet. I kept working towards 10,000. When they told me to fly at 300 knots, I didn't accept 303. And you can't even hardly tell that the needle is saying 303, but it's not straight, and you can tell. But I kept working to make sure that I wasn't at 303 or 305 or 295. I kept working back and forth, trying to get to 300 because that's how I learned how to fly in the Navy. When they say 10,000, they don't mean 10,000 in 1 foot. They mean 10,000. When they say 300 knots, that's what they mean. And they were very impressed with my wanting to be perfect in the air.
Yeah. Well, it sounds good. Basically what you're saying is even though you're not perfect, you were making corrections all the time.
That's correct. And that's what they appreciated. Another thing is, you remember, you weren't married at this time. I was married with two children. And I'll be very honest with you, the transition from the Navy to civilian or airline was extremely difficult because I knew now I could get fired. In the Navy, even if you got in trouble, you'd probably get your check every 2 weeks. Well, I had two children and a wife, and we moved to Memphis, Tennessee. And I will tell you this, Paul. So the first airplane that I flew at FedEx, I actually didn't fly. I was an engineer, which I knew nothing about once again. And an engineering panel is very, very hard if you're not used to it. They were calling air conditioning packs. They were talking about fuel systems, electrical systems, and I knew how to do that in a Navy jet. But as far as a big 727, I had no clue. And once again, in the back of my head, if you didn't know what you were doing and you did wrong, you could get fired. So I worked my ass off. I really did. I studied, and finally got to where I was a good engineer in a Beast 727. I believe you flew those 727s, didn't you? Because I went from a 727 to an engineer in a DC 10, but you went from a 727 engineer into the right seat, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I flew all three crew positions, the back seat, the right seat, the left seat. Enjoyed them all, but you're right. A good friend of mine, years ago, he worked for Eastern Airlines. And when I was going through uh, flight engineer school on 727 FedEx, he was doing the same thing at Eastern. We finished about the same time. He just said, "What an ordeal." And that's what it was. Most people won't know what it is because that technology has been replaced by computers years and years ago. And they used to refer to it, even till it stopped flying, as the Jurassic jet. It was an older than a dinosaur. So most people today there's no requirement you to take a flight engineer written exam just to get an interview. You had to do all that stuff. You had to study some of that crap. It was generic, and each airline did things differently, but you had to do that and pass it. And then when you got to your company, you go through your practical training, then they would give you a certificate. I still have mine somewhere. That, and my mother would say that, and 25 cents will get you a phone call. But you had, at the time,
Yeah.
that was the way to do it. You had to do it.
Well, when I took that engineering test, I'll be very honest with you, I got 100 because I studied all 500 questions in the test pamphlet. I knew every single question. That bad I wanted this job. That's how bad I wanted to stay employed. And I remember I got 100 on that test.
Yeah, yeah. Just memorize the stuff. Has no bearing on anything in the real world. Just pass it, and then it's basically these are the screening pictures. People are not interested. I don't want to do that. Well, you have no business being here. So these are little things. That doesn't mean just because you get 100 doesn't mean you know anything. It means you went to the trouble to get to the next step.
Things I can memorize.
There you
That's
go.
what it meant. It meant I could memorize stuff.
Memorize.
Well, also, you realize when we were flight engineers, you didn't just do your panel work. You had to make the coffee, you had to bring the coffee, you had to inspect the whole jet. So whether it was raining, hot, snowing, it didn't matter. You were the one outside inspecting the whole jet. Then you had to get your coffee to the captain. And then after the flight, you had to do the paperwork. And they were dead serious about that paperwork because that's how we used to get paid. If those numbers were incorrect, it would mess up your pay. And the pilots that I was flying with were not playing that. That was very important, the paperwork. But, once again, after 6, 7, 8 months, I could do that in my sleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's basically they had your own ritual. You did everything pen and paper, pencil and paper. That's how it was done. That is, we're in a digital age now, and everything is kind of recorded for you by the
Yeah.
airplane itself. But yeah, but the biggest thing I remember is carrying all those books. You know,
Oh, my
carrying all
goodness.
the books, all the performance manuals. People messed their backs up carrying those things. They had a hard time coming
Yes.
back from back injury than a heart procedure. You got to prove all this stuff, carrying all the lugging all those bags. Now it's all on the iPad. 10,000 times more information is in an iPad.
Yes, and I remember when we transitioned to the iPad, that also wasn't so easy because now all that information that you knew were in the books and you knew where to find them, now you had to go digital and find it on an iPad. All your parking diagrams, your taxi diagrams, all the airports in the world were on that iPad. So that was a hard transition, but by then I knew I had my job.
You have a hard time, but what made it easier, find a younger person that knows how to do all that stuff. And they could tell you where everything was. That's what I did. Where is all this stuff? And I would just show you in like 2 minutes. I got to know like four things. Tell me not 100 things, four things. He told you four things.
The gouge. Remember, we have a thing called the gouge. That shit you need to know, but nobody tells you. And in the airlines, the gouge was really important because they could tell you a couple of steps that would make your job so much easier if you didn't have to find it out yourself. So after your 727 flying, where did you go next?
I do 727. I went through my progression was from the flight engineer 727 to the right seat co-pilot of the 727, then the co-pilot of the DC-10 major change, then back to the 727 as captain, and then I went to the Airbus as a captain, then went to the MD-11 as a captain, and went to the 777 as a captain. That's how I ended my career. Very interesting. I enjoyed all the positions, and each airplane was like working for a different company.
My progression was a little different. I went from flight engineer of a 727 to flight engineer of a DC-10. And from the flight engineer to DC-10, I got the best job in the company, and that was flying the right seat co-pilot of a DC-10 because I did nothing. I didn't have to do anything but fly that airplane. The engineer did all the work and the captain took all the responsibility. Now, one thing people to know is that Dr. Paul became a captain. I did not become a captain because in the airline industry, seniority is everything. And every time you moved up in position, you went to the well, I'm on the bottom anymore. I actually retired very, very high up. I think I was number 7 or 8 out of 300 guys in the 777. I was in the right seat of the 777. And that means I got to pick all my trips. So remember that trip that you, I, and Keith went on when we flew a 777 to Paris?
Yeah.
Well, that was a 4-day layover. And so those are the kind of trips I wanted to make. I didn't make as much money as a captain, but I was pretty close because I got to do some extra time. So, but I kept my schedule as I wanted to. And remember, I had 2 children, and now both of them were starting to play ball. So I had to work around my schedule to watch my kids play, and it just worked out very well. Well, what happened to me was I had diabetes and I had to stop flying. Even though I was keeping my blood sugar in check, back then you could not take insulin, and that's what they started me on was insulin for my diabetes. Well, 12 years after that, some kind of way, I worked myself into shape and I didn't have to take insulin anymore. And you know, Paul, I came back to flying after 12 years of being off, and I went to that Airbus, the Airbus 300. And from there, I went to the 777, and that's where I finished my career. It was the best airplane I ever flew.
Yeah. Well, kudos for you, for being off 12 years and coming back. That's tough to do because when you came back, what was the difference? What did you see that was different between the time you left and the time you came back?
Well, that's a great question. One of the big things was now these airplanes had glass. When I left, they were all digital. They were all switches and buttons. It wasn't glass. And glass was a lot harder to figure out if you're just coming back. So what was good was I flew that uh, Airbus that had digital and glass. So it kind of eased me into it. And I'll tell you what, I screwed up a lot of people in training because now when somebody came back and they were like, I haven't flown in 3 months. That's why I'm not doing good. They would say, well, yeah, I know somebody who hasn't flown in 12 years and they did better than you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's like you said. Yeah, the Airbus was a combination of analog, old stuff, and glass. That was good.
Let's talk about something else because you flew another airplane that I kind of make fun of you about, that MD-11, which was one of the hardest airplanes to learn how to fly. The school that FedEx had was very difficult. Tell us about that MD-11. They call it the Mad Dog, a McDonnell Douglas 11.
Yeah, the Mad Dog. I call that an airplane. It was what was to say character building. It's character building training sequence. It was very demanding. It was a good airplane. I ended up liking it. I flew 15 years. Very comfortable in it. It did have some unique flight characteristics, some unique handling characteristics. And if you figure that out and honored them, you would do okay. It was very complicated. I think the airplane was released before the software was really mature, and until yeah, they just put it out there. It did weird things. I'd heard about it for years, and nobody knew why. And I'd experienced a couple myself, and everybody would just kind of shrug their shoulders. So, well, I don't know. We don't know. So but that was interesting. Nobody else flies them now. I guess well, FedEx still has some. UPS have some. None others in the United States that I'm aware of. You rarely see them around the world, and I've been retired years now. You might see it from some Chinese janky cargo carrier or something in Kazakhstan. but you rarely saw the MD-11. It's pretty much it worked better for cargo people. Lufthansa had a bunch of them, but it could be challenging. But I've enjoyed flying it. I would say I enjoyed flying it.
What I really liked in that 777 is that everything was automated. And by that time, I learned how to fly glass, and glass was now better than digital. And you had to learn how to work that computer because when you got into these big airplanes, taking off and landing was the only real flying you did with your hands. And sometimes in the end, the landings were so good, they were automated landings, they could actually land better than you could in bad weather. But it was mostly knowledge of the airplane, knowledge of the systems, and knowledge of ATC and how to fly around the world. Because that was
Yeah.
very interesting flying the places in the world, which you did a lot. What did you think about flying, not being in America anymore and flying all over the world?
I was that's what that was my standard. I was very, very comfortable. It was interesting. Our flight schedules were such where you might start a trip for a period of time and you take off in one direction and you literally circle the earth. You keep flying until you come back to the place you started. So that's for those who believe in the flat earth theory and all that stuff. I've got I lost track how many times I circled the globe. So if you're Kyrie Irving or whoever else, Lord Jamar, whatever rappers, maybe you just need to get enough money. You can just maybe jump seat with a crew and just literally fly around the world. You look at the compass and you fly that same direction until you end back up where you started.
That's amazing that people still hold on to that dumbass theory that the world is flat. I think they just do it to get some attention. Well, I enjoyed flying all over the world too, seeing different countries, uh, experiencing different kinds of food, different cultures. It was wonderful. And all of a sudden, it came to be what I really wanted to be was an airline pilot who made a lot of money and worked only half the month. That finally happened. And I was very happy. And I think FedEx was one of the greatest companies that you could ever be in. Matter of fact, let me tell you this after about 10 years of flying, we used to jump seat on each other's planes. Pilots from Delta, United, anybody could jump seat if they were a pilot. And I remember jump seating with a Delta pilot. Him and I, remember I told you about seniority. Well, him and I were hired at the same week. He was hired at Delta, I was hired at FedEx. When we compared salary, when we compared vacation time, when we compared retirement, it wasn't even close. FedEx was the best paying, best flying airline in the world. And that must have been God because I would have taken Delta at any time. And I'm so glad because, first of all, boxes don't bother you.
And they don't complain. And, it was a unique operation because of the boxes. And if you remember, when you were senior, a lot of your flying was at night, in the middle of the night. So, when Chairman Smith set up the company, he did give the pilots some benefits, and some of your vacation things were pretty good because in many ways, physically, your body was taking quite a beating at night with that schedule, in and out, night every day. Your circadian rhythms, a lot of your rhythms are off without going around the world, just going between Memphis and Buffalo. So, there were some good things built into the system, which I think exists today.
Well, everybody out there who can hear us, I want you to know we're two black men coming from Harlem, New York, coming from difficulties that a lot of people had. But you're looking at two guys who made it through education. We went and got our education. Yes, we both fought racism. But guess what? Racism and ignorance could not beat us, and we wouldn't let them beat us. And that's why we're called the Wingmen Show, because other people helped us and a wingman helps another person. Well, everybody out there who can hear my voice, whatever you think is important, whatever you think is beautiful, and most importantly, whatever makes you happy, may you have that today and forever. I pray for peace.
I pray for peace, Commander Drew, and I hope you enjoy your vacation. Hope those who listen, like, and share our message have some joy in their lives. Again, look for your own wingman. Everybody's not bad. There are people actually willing to help you, ready and willing to help you. Sometimes you just have to search them out. Go the extra mile.
No doubt about it. And if you bust your ass, one day you could be on a Virgin voyage like I am right now in the middle of Atlantic doing our show, enjoying every moment of it. Thank you once again, Dr. Paul Thompson, my friend. Thank you for your love, your time, and that's something that we won't ever get back. I want to thank all the listeners, too. Thank you so much for doing the show, Dr. Paul. We're jamming.
Well, thank you, Mr. Drew, for inviting me on. Always good to talk to you. And ladies and gentlemen, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast or any of the podcasts. If you're looking at YouTube, they say smash the like button. Don't smash it. Just press it gently and refer to use as a link to all your friends. You can also look at us on our website, wingmenshow.com, WINGMEN show, SHOW.com, altogether, wingmenshow.com. And we hope to see you in the future. Thanks again, Mr. Drew.
Oh, you're welcome. And we're still floating like butterflies and stinging like bees. Rumble, you badass jet pilots, rumble. May there be peace on earth and goodwill towards all men and women.